beautiful. I am a lot more like I'm not as visually like talented, so there's that. But my project, well, it's a really big project, but the overall like I guess title is Advancing Safety for Black Queer Youth, Chicago High School Students Visions for Safe Educational Spaces. And we can go to the next like real slide. And so just to give a little context about like why I chose this population and what this project was. So in my department, Ed Policy Studies, aka EPS, we have a project that's called like a pilot study. It's kind of like a very, think of like a watered down master's thesis, watered down just because it's shorter. And I know that I want to focus on how we can improve safety for Black queer youth in schools. And so I use this project as an opportunity to really center their voices. And any discussions we have about school safety. And so I went out, it was basically a multi-methods project, which just means like multiple tiny projects within one bigger one. And at first there were gonna be three main strands, but I ended up cutting one. But the first strand was talking to them. I ended up having 10 participants, so talking to them about their experiences related to safety within schools, within high school in particular. And the second strand was doing focus groups with them, very small, obviously, because there were only 10 people, but focus groups to kind of get their ideas around how we could improve specifically the Chicago public school system and what like ideal safety would look like in centering freedom dreaming and basically thinking about how can we talk about safety and improve safety for them or for their peers or for the kids who come after without necessarily like censoring trauma all the time. Yeah, and there were just two small changes. I didn't know how like in depth to go about like specific like project changes, but there were two things that changed. So the first is I mentioned that I have to cut my third strand because it was just a little bit too big for this little like watered down master's thesis that I had to do. And it was going to be doing like document analysis. So my plan was like, okay, I'm going to talk to the young people, learn about their personal experiences related to safety, learn about their visions for changing things, and then kind of compare that to what exists within the district already. But I ran into a problem where it was like, okay, I need to prioritize my time. And it's like, do I want to spend time looking at these documents, like very depersonalized and just like, or would I rather like spend time actually, you know, getting data directly from the young people? And I chose to focus on the young people and decided like if I want to do the doc analysis, maybe at some point in the future, but both in terms of literature and just broadly and other discussions about context, like Black queer young people, their voices are often excluded. So if I had to choose, and I had to choose, you know, I wanted to make sure I kept them in the project. And then another big change, I was hoping to be able to talk to like current high schoolers because retroactive studies they're cool, but it's kind of nice to be able to talk to people like going through different phenomena or in spaces like right now. But it just came down to two things related to safety and kind of IRB. So high schoolers for the most part are going to be minors unless I'm like really talking to like 18-year-old, 19-year-old seniors. And you know, we have to get like parental consent and things like that. And it's just tricky because queerness is one of those things where if a young person is not out at home and they have to get like these parental signatures, it could end up outing them. Or if like a family member sees like a poster, or even just in school, like if or not a poster, but like a flyer, if they're in school and one of their peers sees that they like liked my post or something like that, you know, like just these different situations that I didn't want to put young people in. And then thinking about how like that is a battle I could have taken up with IRB, but I was advised just like, okay, can you learn basically what you want to learn by talking to young people who are a little bit older? The answer was yes. And then maybe save all of that fight for IRB for the dissertation, which will be like in a couple of years. And so one key finding, there were a lot of things that came out of this, but one key finding was just that youth were guaranteed to encounter what I call factors of unsafety. So being Black and queer students, like they were almost guaranteed to encounter like racism from teachers, from peers, things like metal detectors or like police within schools, problematic security guards, a lot of sexism, things like this. But when it came to thinking about whether they would encounter safe people or safe spaces, that really dependent on luck, and luck is not my word. It's kind of theirs. A lot of them would say like, I got lucky to get this one teacher, or I was fortunate enough, or I wasn't fortunate enough to get this. And so that's something I've kind of been grappling with. And then in terms of what's left, I need to write these papers. It's either going to be 2 or 3, because like I said, they're like mini projects within this bigger thing. And then within education, we have the American Educational Research Association, which is taking place in Chicago in April. So I'll be doing like some roundtables there. And then next slide, last slide. All right, so the biggest lesson I think I learned from this, like, what was supposed to be a smaller project that I kind of defied my department and made it a little bigger than it should have been, but just that I know I want to keep doing this type of work related to Black queer youth and improving safety and centering their voices and really working with them. But just this idea that fostering community and spaces of healing, those 2 things are essential to doing this work effectively. And I think there were 2 things that kind of like that I did that kind of helped youth feel like comfortable. And so the first was my process of just like building relationships with them. So like before any interview started, first of all, this was like all virtual. So it's very hard to build relationships with someone you're never going to be like in the same room with, but making sure I like had like just short informal phone calls with them. The actual interviews were semi-structured, so it was like very conversational, and just letting them talk to me about things like college and things like that, because I'm like same population, but just a little bit older. And so I was able to build that relationship. And then I had this rule of not digging for any trauma, right? Because when we think about safety, we think about things like bullying, mental health, and all of these different things. And those are elements of safety, but there's so much more to talk about. And there are ways to talk about safety and improving safety without making, especially young people, like kind of dig up their trauma or feel like they have to recite it, kind of related to what Emily was saying in the last presentation. And I think those 2 things, and the focus groups in particular, they really, really, really liked having this like trauma-free space to talk about how we can improve schools, how we can improve safety. And they wanted to connect with each other more and saying like, oh, like I wish we could do more with this. There was one kid in particular who was like, oh, like if you do another study, like I would like to come back. And I'm like, this is great. And it just made me realize that like in community and healing, or at least trauma-free spaces, are absolutely important to this work. And so it's making me rethink what's possible in terms of methods for my dissertation, and thinking about like how can I center community, not just these young people, but center like basically building networks of healing through the work that I do. I think I went over. I apologize.